Good morning. This is Dr. Matthew Moynihan. I'm going to be doing the 8-month update of the Fusioneer's Handbook. For the 9-month from last month, you want to click on the link below here. That'll help. Again, there are 6 goals for this book. Kind of rearranged them from last month. The first and foremost is technical accuracy. This book has to be technically accurate, and that's mainly what we're working through right now. We have a draft that's due to Springer on the end of April 2021, and I think we're on track to do that. This book has to be clear. This is squarely in the realm of public science communication on fusion. So it's addressing gaps in the public knowledge. This is a big tent fusion approach, so we're going to be doing 8 different fusion families, which is slightly different than a lot of different books that you see out there that focus specifically on, say, tokamaks or ICF. We're going to be celebrating fusion history and fusion heroes. So these are stories, basically, written around the technology, sort of in the vein of maybe the making of the atomic bomb. And we're going to be looking at some people who dedicated 30 or 40 years of their professional careers to a specific technical approach. We're going to be explaining fusion with artwork. So this explanation is grouped around specific figures, not necessarily derivations. So it's slightly different than what else is out there. And we're going to be updating the public on the current commercial efforts to get fusion going. So that's the main goals. It's an overview of the book. It hasn't really changed very much from the previous month's update. We added 5 pages in the plasma science material, and we firmed up the magnetic mirror stuff. So there was progress made there. So to celebrate progress, I finished rewriting chapter 2. It was about 15 pages of content. Really proud of that. Then once I did that, I moved on to firming up the LDX section in the mirrors chapter, which hadn't been done. So that's now done. So chapter 4 is really kind of a full rewrite finished. Received comments from Dr. Richard Hubbard on chapter 2 that was really helpful. Those comments have to be responded to. That was about 13 pages of material. And then right after, I emailed him out the rest of the chapter, and he responded quickly, and we got comments on the rest of chapter 2. So there's technical comments to be reviewed for each. Also, I requested use of Tokamak Energy's images for the Tokamak chapter from Melanie Winridge. She's going to get back to me on that, but I want the Tokamak chapter to have nice pictures of each of the subsystems in a tokamak, like the poloidal field coils or the bounce coils, and write an explanation that's really grouped around the mechanics of each one of those subsystems. So that's going to be sort of a first part of the tokamak chapter. Finally, I enlisted the help of another writer, Angrag. There's a picture of him in the lower right. He is a recent graduate of the University of Tennessee's nuclear engineering program, and he's going to be starting a column in the next few months. But in this downtime, he says he wants to work on the fusion book, so I'm going to bring him in for certain work units. So the modeling section of chapter 2 is about 13 pages of content, and it's grouped around different frameworks for modeling plasma. So the first 4 are analytical models that could necessarily be solved with paper and pencil. So they're kind of grouped together. And then the last 3 are models that you require a computer to solve. So, and this goes through each section. So the first thing is a single particle, which I encourage the reader to do. So if a reader's encountering a new fusion reactor concept, the first thing that they should probably do is model the path of a single particle. And this is a thought experiment. It's clearly just to get an intuitive feel for the reactor. No actual reactor just has one particle. However, you can learn a lot by just modeling the motion of a particle. So the reader is asked to introduce a particle in an XYZ location, calculate the Lorentz force on that particle, and then map the motion using Newton's equations of motion to gain an intuitive feel. So that was a really nice introduction. After that, I go straight to a full Vaslov equation, so the Kimitovich model, which basically accounts for everything. And I introduce all 6 sets of 6 equations for Vaslov and what each one is. It's the 4 Maxwell equations, plus 2 Navier-Stokes equations, one for a positive fluid and one for a negative fluid. I then use this analogy of a roller coaster to talk about how a Vaslov equation is a distribution of particles that's operated on by a set of equations to get a new distribution of particles. And the comparison I give is a bunch of people going on a roller coaster. They come in a certain way and they leave some wet or some dry or some windblown. And the roller coaster is an operator on that population. So that's the analogy I kind of went with. Then I talk about ideal Magneto hydrodynamics, the assumptions that lead to that, and I sort of give this picture as a good example. So Magneto hydrodynamics doesn't model microturbulence or micro instabilities that happen in tokamak plasmas, but it's sort of an idealized world where the fields are perfect and they're perfectly operating on the particles, and the particles don't have much of an influence on the fields. So that's a nice set. And then I go to two fluid. Now, two fluid, of course, a lot of great work has been done with the two fluid model. It was kind of the benchmark analytical model in the 80s and 90s. So I talk a lot about two fluid work. In particular, I talk about Ryder's work. So a whole 2 pages is dedicated to Ryder's analysis of systems not at thermodynamic equilibrium. And for this, I gave a nice little picture of this model from Nathaniel Howard at MIT in 2015, where he shows how plasmas can ripple. And you can have groupings of positives and groupings of negatives, and then they move and dissipate around sort of quasi-neutrality. So this is a nice way to talk about two fluid and then think about how two fluid is inaccurate and how it's good for certain conditions and certain where you have large groups of ions and maybe not so many electrons, and how it can be flawed. And then once that's done, I transition to computer models. So I take a little step back into history and talk about Frank Harlow's work at the T3 group at Los Alamos and how he did particle and cell. And then I talk about gyrokinetics. So I introduce the idea that ions corkscrew around particle fields or electrons corkscrew around magnetic fields, and how gyrokinetics, the assumption is, of course, they're going to throw out the corkscrew and treat it like a straight motion. And by doing that, they reduce the total number of variables to track for each superparticle from 6 to 5, which makes the whole thing computationally much easier to solve. So I talk about the advantages of that and then compare it to kinetics. Then I go into a discretized Vaslov model where you have different blobs that exist in different cells in the reactor, and each blob will exchange mass or energy, and then the Vaslov equations operate independently on each blob. So you can model a whole reactor by modeling it in these small chunks of plasma, which gets you different sort of advantages as a model over, say, a kinetics or gyrokinetics model. And finally, I devote a little half paragraph on quantum field theory and how quantum field theory presents a new framework for modeling plasma, where you treat a plasma in a field and how fields operate. So it gives you a whole new set of Lagrangian mathematics, which allow you to do sort of field calculations. Anyway, that's the update from this month. Upcoming this month, I'd like to work on the tokamak chapter. It needs a lot of work. And I need to rewrite the FRC chapter, and as I said in the previous update, that's going to be a lot easier because I've got a lot of content from Helicity Space. And I need to respond to Dr. Terry's comments on pinches because it's been a really long time since I've gotten to his material, and pinch chapter needs to be moved forward. So it's a lot of work. If you're interested, please reach out to me. You can email me, and thank you.